All right. So let's continue with the the session where we left. Last session. I think we completed the prototyping, and iterating is where we stopped, right? But anyway, we have still not got into the actual role of a business analyst. We are still trying to understand what are the ways in which projects could be executed, and so this will help us be much more comfortable in when we get into our jobs, right? So there's nothing to do with the business analyst role specific knowledge. It is only the way things work out in the industry, right? So how are typical projects executed, right? So you'll get that understanding.
Sorry, sir. Just one more last question. The thing is, like, would you also cover the jargons, domain specific, like the healthcare or the finance or retail?
That would be a wide gamut to cover. But if you want something specific, I can provide you some high-level view of documents which you can read. Because even if I would have to say I would cover banking, that has so many
Right.
subtopics within it. It would be impossible to be covering it in a 1 or 2 sessions, be it even 30 or 40 sessions. Right?
Okay. So what about the use? Okay, so what about the user stories? You would be focusing mainly on which kind of domain to have a good knowledge on it?
We will take examples for when we are covering those topics. So we will cover both the use cases, which are UML based, which you typically do it in a traditional SDLC, and user stories when we are doing it in an agile way. Right?
Okay.
So both of them would be covered. Yeah. So
okay.
So I think you can refer to the course content. I think it's comprehensively mentioned what all we would cover as part of that. So we're talking about the various types in which the projects could be executed, and iterative model is one of them. Now, generally, we would go for iterative models where the project timelines are long, right? Let's say a project typically would have taken you 2 years. Now, that's too long a time for you to wait till you start using the system, right? So by the time the system is developed and then you're good to go, use the system. The requirements could be outdated or the technology could be outdated, right? So you might not find much use of that system after 2 years, right? So a lot of projects would tend to be like that. So how do you handle these kind of situations? Now the easiest way is you would break it down into smaller sub projects and then handle it, right? Now a good example would be your your softwares in your mobile phones, right? Now, if you look at it, every 3 months or 6 months, you would have a version coming out. Right? If you're using an Apple phone, there would be a iOS version coming in every 6 months. Right? Now, had these guys waited till they have this perfect version and then added all these features and then given to you, it might have taken them like some 4 or 5 years to complete that. Right? And they would have lost so much of business because of that. But what they did was they came up with the first version maybe in 2005-06 with some basic features which could make the phone useful, right? And people started using it. And in the second version, iOS 2, they came up with multiple other additional features, right? So incrementally the functionality was delivered, right? Now this way they didn't have to wait till they have developed the product comprehensively, and the timelines were also reduced, right? So rather than wait some 4 years to deliver an iOS product, they did that within 6 months or so, right? So something like that. So you're breaking down a project into smaller phases, like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Right? And each one of these phases would have some functionality within it. Right? So if you have a scope, you are breaking down into, let's say, four subdivisions. Then saying this was phase 1, phase 2, 3, and 4. Right? So in each of these 4 phases, you'd have all the functionality covered, right? But you're giving it in each, each phase you're considering it as a whole project and then going through delivering it, right? So you're doing your requirement analysis, design, development, testing, and then delivering to the end users, right? So while the users are using it, then your second implementation would start. Okay, that's the advantage of an iterative model. You don't have to wait so long to start using the complete functionality. Okay. So within each iteration, again, the steps are similar. You would have an analysis, design, coding, and testing happening.
This iterative model, is it similar to Agile?
Not exactly. Agile works in a different way. I'll explain about Agile also later in this.
Yeah, because in Agile also I've heard like, they work on increments.
Right. So they would do that in Agile as well, but this one would be done in a different way. Okay. So see, Agile works in a different way. I'll explain what is different in Agile. But iterative model, it's similar like having multiple waterfall models within it. Right? So there are your 4 phases. You've broken down the requirement, the scope into 4 different phases, and each phase within it would be a waterfall in itself. Okay.
Okay.
So when I come out to Agile, I'll explain the differences. Right. So the way the prioritization is done, or the way the phases of the project could be done, they would be very different. The way that you communicate or document your requirements, all those details would be very much different from iterative model. So moving on, the next one, the spiral model. Now this is usually used for very complex projects which are very critical, complex, and hard to implement. Right? Where there are too many risks involved in the system, you generally tend to go for a spiral model. Okay. Now let me give you a context of where this could be useful, and then I think you'll be able to relate. Now let's say there is a new technology, okay, completely new technology, and you want to implement your core system in that particular technology. So existing system is, let's say, in mainframe system, an old green screen system wherein you don't even have a GUI and all is you'll have to type in using your keyboard. So that kind of system is there, but it is your core system, and you want to migrate that into a latest technology. Let's say Java using struts or whatever it is. Okay. Now, there are too many unknowns in this project. So you could feel that whether that new technology Java could support the kind of volumes which are being processed by my system. Right. So let's say that there are like 2,000 transactions which are 2,000 or 20 million transactions which have to be processed in a particular day. Okay. Now the old system is supporting, that, but you don't know whether the new system would support those kind of number of transactions or not. Okay. So you should not be in a situation that you capture all the detailed requirements about the system. You spend like 6 months capturing all the detailed requirements. You spend some $1 million for those requirements, and then during the design you figure out, this system doesn't support the number of transactions. Okay. Now all your money which you have spent, all the $1 million for capturing the detailed requirements, is gone waste. So there is no use of it because you cannot implement in the new system. Right. Now at that point you would think we should have actually looked at this risk right at the start of the project. Right. So that's exactly what we're doing in a spiral model. So when you start the project and then figure out there are too many risks, what you would do is you'll find out what are my key objectives of my system. You will find that first, right? Let's say my first key objective of the project is to support that volume of transactions, because not all technologies can support. So I just want to make sure that before I start the detailed implementation of the system, I'll make sure that the technology is supported. Okay. Now, so the first step is basically to figure out whether the number of transactions are supported or not. So I'll figure out what are the risks involved in it, and then do some small, I'll pick up one functionality and then ensure that 20 million transactions can be processed, right? Once that is successful, only once that is successful, then I'll move on to the next topic, the next set of objectives, and then incrementally go with the development, right? So my second objective could be, it should support some 100,000 customers, 100,000 users. Okay, when 100,000 users log in, the system should not crash. Then I'll go back and then do some development and make sure that I test that functionality. So the second objective is to ensure that number of users are supported. And let's say you've done that development as well. Now the third objective or key requirements would be, I want these 3 new features to come in, right? So you just do the development of that, and then incrementally, or a risk-based approach you're taking up, and with each prototype you're developing the system, right? So this way, if any point, if you feel that the risks are high, and you're not able to meet the requirements, you could just stop the project. So your costs are much more contained in that kind of scenario. Even if the project fails, you're not wasting a lot of money. Okay, so that is basically a risk-based approach where you are, judiciously using your budgets, and then trying to implement the system within the minimum spent. Okay, usually this is used for very complex kind of projects. But again, it's similar to an iterative model in a sense, right? So with each iteration, you'll have a defined scope, and then you'll have to do that. Just that before identifying those iterations, you're figuring out what are your objectives, what are your key risks involved with it, and then carrying it out in an iterative model. It would be similar to your iterative model. All right. The next one is the product implementations. Okay, now a lot of the systems these days are getting complex. Okay, so they're not like a simple system which could be developed in 3 months or 6 months, and they're becoming very complex. And each and every client, if they start developing these systems, they would have to spend huge amount of money and time, and there are too many risks involved with them as well. Right? For example, take some systems like your payroll processing system. Okay. Now, payroll processing system is a very common functionality. Every organization would need that. Right? Now, if each and every customer starts developing that payroll functionality system, it might cost them, let's say, 5 million for each of those customers. Right? Now, since it's a very standard functionality, very common functionality, and there is nothing which they are going to gain from that system. Almost every organization would have the same payroll functionality, right? So, what happened is some organizations, some IT companies thought, okay, since everybody is going to use the same product, the same application, I will develop it on myself, and then I'll sell this application to different vendors. Right? So that's how the products evolve. So what are the advantages? First thing, your costs are much lower. Right? So let's say it costs you some 3 million to develop the application. Right? So your costs are only 3 million. And you would have charged your, if the customer has implemented for himself, right, so you would have charged him 5 million. Right? Or just to keep it simple, let's say you would have charged the customer 3 million. Okay, so your costs are 3 million, so you're asking the customer also to pay 3 million. Right? Now, let's say you have developed a product and then you are selling it to 5 customers, or let's say 3 customers. Right? So then in this case, each customer can just pay 1 million. Right? So your costs are much lower in products. That's the main advantage you get. Okay. The second thing, if you have to develop this complete functionality, it would have taken you some 2 years. Okay. But to implement that system to a specific client, right, it would have just taken you 3 months. Right? Because already the functionality is developed, you just only need to make some minor tweaks, and that it would have reduced your timelines. So organizations save on cost, on time by using the products, right? So they are also less riskier, right? So risk is less. So these are the advantages they get out of products. Okay. Now let's spend some time understanding how the products are implemented as well, right? But before we go there, you understand what a product means, right? So it's the same common functionality which is relevant for multiple customers. You are picking it up and developing it as a common system, and then implementing it at multiple locations. Okay, so that's called as product implementations. Now, what is the process for this overall product implementation? Let's spend some time on that. Okay, so first you will figure out what is my requirement. Let's say that organization wants to implement a payroll processing system. Then what you would do is you will figure out what are all the payroll processing systems available in the market. Right? Now, if you look at ADP is one, then there is a system called Zenefits. Multiple systems are there. If you look at, even if you do a simple Google search, figure out. Right, so you'll get a list of all those applications which will, do the payroll processing. Like there is QuickBooks, then there is HR payroll systems, there is software advice, right? So then there is ADP, which is a very popular tool. Then there is this Capterra, right? So there are multiple systems which are available in the market. Okay, you would do that pre-selection. You figure out, okay, these are the top 10 guys who offer these products for payroll processing, right? And then you would do that initial selection. Now products are there for multiple systems, like your ERP systems, your SAP, Oracle applications, all these are products, right? Which means they have that functionality already built in, and then they will just implement it for those specific customers. Okay. So the first step is figuring out who are all those vendors or the product companies which are offering that product, right? Then what you do is you will figure out your requirements, and then you would evaluate them against the requirement. Okay, so I was explaining about the product implementation. So you'll figure out who are all the vendor, the key players in the market who are offering that functionality. All right. Then you would evaluate all those vendors, right? So usually evaluation you'll figure out. Let's say there are SAP, and then there is Oracle applications, and then there is Microsoft Dynamics. Multiple products are there to meet the requirement, right? If you pick up the payroll processing, we looked at the list just now. Yeah. So there is Zinger, then there is QuickBooks, HR payroll systems, right? So you could just do a top 10 payroll processing system, right? So and then you could get some of these reviews, right? So you'll figure out those top 10 or through this pre-selection process, and then you would evaluate all these 10 products that you have identified against your requirements. Right? So broadly, you will have these requirements that my pay slip should be generated. Then we should have this declaration part, investment part, whatever it is. Right? So there there would be some features which are available as part of your payroll processing system. Right? You will compare it against your set of requirements. Right? Some of them would be available, some of the features would not be available. We call that as a product fitment. Okay, so like one system could meet like 80% of your requirements, right? If there are like 100 requirements, if 80 are met by just configuration, which without any changes, that means it's 80% is there is an 80% product. Some other system could just meet some 50% of the requirements, right? So the more the product fitment, the more desirable it is. Okay, so you'll figure out all those the products and then evaluate them and see what is the product fitment. Then you also consider the price, right? Then you would also look at the risk involved in it. Is this a reliable product vendor, or other implementations where it is implemented, are they facing any problems? So you'll consider all those things and then finally figure out one guy and then say, okay, I'm going with this guy because this guy has a good product fitment, his price is also competitive, and then he has already already implemented this software at multiple locations and then using it. So all those would be considered, and finally you would choose one vendor. Okay, so then you would go through the same process. You would start the project planning, so wherein you prepare a detailed project plan. Okay, but the steps involved in the implementation would be a little different, right? So there is no requirements phase from the starting, right? So you're not capturing the detailed requirement right from the scratch. So what you're doing is, out of your 100 features that you have agreed upon, right? So 80 of them are already met, right? So only the 20 is what are not met by the product, right? So 20 features are not available in the system. So that is generally considered as gap. So you'll figure out, how should I implement this 20? What all customization I need to do? Okay. So once you understand those, how to implement those 20 changes also, then you do we would say it is customization. That's a more widely used word. So you would customize or do the development for those 20 features, right? So basically you're making sure that all your 100 features are met, right? 80 of them are already there in the product, and 20 you have developed specifically for this implementation. Let's pick up some product, right? So let's say you are looking at a software for or let's keep it simple. Let's say you want to check a presentation software, like there is MS Office is one, then there are some freewares also, right? So there is one Google software. Now you have some 100 requirements, like you should be able to project the presentation, and then you should be able to do the annotations, right? And then you should be able to save it. You should be able to move to next slide, previous slide. So right. So there are multiple features. Now some of them might not be available, right? So maybe like this, like this erasing this ink might not be available in some software, right? But if you feel that this is important for me, I need to do it. So you need to develop that as part of your implementation, right? So if I as a client want that feature, if I as a, let's say I am part of an organization, Citibank. Now Citibank for its employees wants a PowerPoint application along with that erase functionality, so which was not there. So that features which are not there needs to be developed specifically for that particular client, right? So or let's take a more realistic example, like a payroll processing system. Right. Okay. Right. Now, so basically, these are all the features which are already available in the system, right? Now, let's say I want this charitable donations also to be part of my final features, and I've checked, I've finalized on Infinite Cloud, which doesn't give me that option of doing charitable donations, right? But I want that feature. So what do? I would actually develop it as part of my implementation. You get it? So that part is called as a gap, right? So that charitable donations which is not supported by this Infinite Cloud is a gap, right? So I need to develop that features in this product, Infinite Cloud product. So that I would identify it as this features which are not there in the product, and then I need to capture the requirements for those 20 features. The rest of the 80 are already there, like there's a payslip detailed representation is there, printing is there, manual adjustments are there, right? We can do all that, right? But one feature which was missing is if I want to do a contribution or donation, charitable donation, that feature is not supported in this system. Okay, so to do that, what will you do? You'll take that as a gap and then make those changes to the software. You'll add that additional functionality, which we call it as customization. Okay, so clear about this example, Ali? Do you understand what gap is now?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, all right. So you would figure out what is the features which are not there as part of the standard product, and since it is important to you, how would you want to implement it? So you'll analyze those requirements, 20 requirements, and then you do the development. So this is where the customization and development happens, and the design and development of only those 20 features. You don't need to do for all 80, right? The rest of the 80 you would configure, right? Like configuration is mostly, we also call it as parameter setting. Now what it means is you would basically rather than do any programming, you are setting your requirements by changing some parameters. Like if you pick up an example like an invoice generation, right? Now some companies would give their time of 15 days for paying the bill after an invoice is generated. Some companies give you 90 days of time. Okay, now it differs from company to company. So that configuration is a process where you define the time, right? So if the organization wants 15 days, you'll put it as 15 days. The organization wants it as 90 days, you will put it as 90 days as a invoice, right? Similarly, if you pick up a payroll generation, right? So you could have a payroll generated every month, then, or it could be done once every week, right? It's all upon the customer, right? If the customer says no, I want a payroll generated every week, you could even do that, right? So all that configuration would be done. Then you would give training to the teams of how the system should be done, used, right? Now if I have to start using this Infinite Cloud, I don't know how it works, right? I want somebody to train me on how to use the system, right? So that is basically what is done as part of the training. Then you would test all your features and functionalities. So testing would be done. Then the end user training would also be given. And finally, you'll give access to your end users. And then the post-implementation or support phase kicks in.
I have a question. Shouldn't configuration be done before the product is customized? Because that should be our priority, Like
see, this configuration is done for existing features. Now customization is done only for these 20 features, right?
Okay.
Now configuration would be done for all 100 requirements or 100 features. So we generally tend to customize and then do the configuration.
Right.
Okay. All right. So moving on. So that's another way of projects. So we looked at the various projects which are mostly aligned to this traditional SDLC, right? So broadly, if you look at all the ones like waterfall, V-shaped, or iterative, spiral, all these were aligned to this SDLC phases. You had a requirements, you had design, development, you tested it, and finally implemented it, right? Now, of late, you keep hearing this term agile a lot, right? A lot of companies are moving away from the traditional SDLC models to agile models. And one of the most popular method of agile is the Scrum model. Okay. Now Scrum model basically is one of the agile techniques, but it is the most popular. So people tend to use that synonymously. Scrum and agile people tend to use synonymously, but there is subtle difference. Now let's first define what agile methodologies is. Now agile, the people who would support agile feel that we waste a lot of time in non-productive activities in an SDLC. When we say non-productive, which means you are writing documents, preparing documentation, you are doing a lot of reviews, and all these are not required. Is what the agile supporters think of, right? They feel that we can implement projects much faster at much lesser cost if you are only focusing on key productive activities rather than doing a lot of these documentation and reviews, right? So that is a major difference between agile school of thought and the SDLC methodologies, right? So they figure out the different ways in which you can make things faster. So that is where different techniques like your pair programming, chat session, extreme programming, all these have come in. But these are all not an end-to-end models like a Scrum. So Scrum model is an end-to-end agile model, right from the requirements till the development till the implementation. Everything is optimized and focused on those productive activities to deliver, right? That is the main reason Scrum has become a lot more popular, right? If you look at organizations, most of them are moving towards agile, and they would definitely want a business analyst to know, or even the developers and the architects to know how to work in an agile model, right? So that is where it becomes important for us to learn Scrum model as well. Okay. Now, the main difference, from a business analyst point of view, between agile and your traditional SDLC would be there would be minimal documentation, right? So earlier in any of these SDLC phases, like be it an iterative or waterfall and all, we were preparing comprehensive detailed business requirements document, BRD, right? So depending on the requirement, our BRD could even go up to 100 200 pages, right? It used to be that comprehensive. All your requirements has to be documented in that. If the requirement is not there in that, then you are not going to design or develop that, right? And then the customer has to review all those 200 pages and then give a sign off, right? Now agile feels that you are wasting a lot of time doing all that, right? So, and you do exactly the opposite of that in an agile. So you're just capturing the requirements minimally, right? You just capture the high level requirements, and that too on a piece of postcard, post-it note, right? So the postcard size post-it notes are used to capture each requirement, right? And you would use a whiteboard and then use these post-it notes to stick on it to capture all your requirements, right? So the way the agile and Scrum model works is completely different from a traditional SDLC. We'll get into the details anyway, but that's the main difference. Okay, so your requirements are documented minimally, and agile encourages a lot of verbal communication, right? Earlier, the sign off used to be by documents. You develop something, and then you prepare a document, your requirements document, and then the document is given to the architect. And after that, architect has to just purely depend on the document and then do his design, right? So unless it's all comprehensively captured, he will not consider that for design. But here it's a lot more collaborative in an agile model, right? So you are you're capturing only the basic requirement which needs to be done in written communication, right? That one a small post-it note, and then the rest of it you are just explaining it to the architect verbally, right? So it takes advantage of both verbal and written communications. Okay. The second main advantage is that it's done in smaller cycles, so it saves you time and money as well. Now this one, smaller cycles, is also done as part of our iterative model, right? So that's a similarity between Scrum model and iterative model, right? But the way you break up the scope into iterations, and here we call each iteration as a sprint, right? Now the way we break up the scope between the phases and sprints here is completely different, right? So the way we call our requirements as a product backlog, and the way we prioritize it and then define the scope for each sprint is very much different from your iterative model, right? So where there we would generally go by those modules and all, here it would be a lot more different, right? When we actually get into the role of a business analyst and when we are looking at the Scrum model, we look at the topic in detail. But yeah, that's at a high level difference between Scrum and okay. So let's take a small example and then I'll give you the context here. So this anyway we would learn it in detail, but how to prioritize your requirements and all. But let me explain at a high level how do we generally execute a Scrum project, right? So first the project is selected, right? So once the project is selected, you would have listed down all your features or functionality which is there as part of your product. Let's say there are some 20 features which needs to be developed as part of your system, right? So those 20 would be listed down. Okay. Now which one is important for you, right? Now the reason we do it is the first iteration or the first few iterations would focus on the most important features, right? Why? Because you get the maximum utility out of it, right? If there are, like, let's say 100 features which I want to develop in a system, okay? Now those 100 features would have taken me 1 year to develop, design, develop, and do everything, right? Now those 100 features, if I have broken down into, let's say, 5 iterations, 5 sprints, right? So rather than 1 year, it would have taken what? Let's keep it as 6. So rather than 1 year, it would have taken us 6 months to 2 months each to deliver each one of them, right? And see, a lot of time we won't use all features equally, right? So if you know this concept of 80-20, it means that 80% of the time we spend using only 20% of the features, right? So any software you pick, only 20% of the features is what you would use very frequently, right? 80% of the time you just spend using 20% of the functionality. So if you would have focused on the 20% functionality in the first iteration, right, you get the maximum utility. You would get that 80% of your time you could have used the system, right? So you are getting the maximum utility. So what you're doing effectively is you are finding out those key priority items and the items which would give you the maximum utility, which you'll use very frequently, and develop that as part of the first iteration. Okay. Now that is called as prioritization of your requirements. We call this as a product backlog. I'll explain about the jargon and all when we get into the detailed session. But broadly, we are prioritizing our requirements, and then the topmost priority requirements are handled in first iteration. Okay. So you'll pick up the set of 5-10 requirements which are important, and then you do that in the first iteration. Now, since you're only picking up a subset of your requirements, it will be done faster, right? And iteration would have all your steps of requirements, design, development, and testing. All of them would happen as part of your iteration, right? And there's a concept called as a daily stand-up meetings, DSMs as we call it as. So every day, there would be the project manager in this is called as a Scrum Master. So he is the guy who coordinates everything. The Scrum Master calls for a daily stand-up meeting every day, and everybody would clearly understand, what they need to do for that particular day. Okay, and what are the dependencies. So those two things are identified, and then they will start working on those activities. Okay, so that's what is done as part of the sprint, and your those 4 or 5 features what you have identified for the sprint are delivered, and then you take it to the customer, right? So the first version, you take it to the customer, he would look at it, and then he would have his feedback also. Maybe some things needs to be improved, right? So you'll improvise those things, and then in the next iteration you would update them. Okay, so you'll keep on doing these iterations till the point where you'll get to a stage where you can actually give the system to a set of users, and they can start using it, right? So that's when it is released to the production environment, and you still keep on continue with the development and giving upgrades to that over and over that version in production.
The Scrum Master is a BA or a project manager?
So there is a Scrum Master, there is a BA, there is a product owner, right? So there is a product owner, we call it as, right? So all these roles are there as part of the project, right? So Scrum Master role is completely different. So it's not a business analyst.
That we have a team, then in team there will be a BA, a project owner, and a Scrum Master, and then the testing team.
Yes. Yes. So a Scrum Master's role would more or less be, overlapped with a project manager. There won't be a project manager in a Scrum model, right? We call them as a Scrum Master because he is a master of this overall the way the project should be executed, right? So rather than calling him as a project manager, he is the guy who owns who guides the team, and then he would clearly coordinate the activities and ensure that everybody is doing their set of activities.
So in product backlog, like all the requirements will be there, like high priority as well as low priority.
Yes. So the product backlog is a set of all your requirements. Now that product backlog is broken down into smaller chunks of requirements, right? Let's say if you have 20 requirements, you will break it down into a set of 5 each, so that there are 4 different blocks of requirements. And each block of 4 you will carry out in an iteration. So 20 into 4, you will end up with 5 iterations or 5 sprints, as we call it as. Okay. Now each sprint timelines, you generally keep it around 2 to 3 weeks. So that's actually very fast, right? So the end users also don't have to wait till too long into the project to see how the final product would look like. So at the end of 2 weeks, the customer can see some features which are developed, and then he can provide his feedback. So which will be again going into your product backlog, and then you will update them, and the process would continue, right? So this is more hands-on. The user involvement is a lot more. It would save you time and money because you are developing in these iterations, right? And how exactly you would save on time and money, I'll explain when we actually talk about the requirements and all, right? So it's a little more, complicated. You need to understand how a product backlog works and how the iteration works, right? So which we'll cover in as part of our, user stories topic, right? So agile way of capturing it is the user stories. When we talk about that, all those details will be covered. Okay. Today's session is only a very high-level overview. Don't think that this is what is Scrum about. We have a comprehensive deck which have 26-30 slides, which will actually explain you the details about how you go about creating those product backlogs, the details about the various releases, and then how do you capture the report also, right? So everything would be covered in detail. So for now, I've just introduced that there is a different way of executing the projects, which is a Scrum model, right? So till now, the last 3 sessions, what we have done is we have just looked at how the industry works, right? So let me quickly summarize the last 3 sessions so that we can clearly know what is the takeaway. So we understood how the client organization looks like, right? So we understood that there are these 3 different teams who have different responsibilities, and then the business teams would give us projects to work on. The budgets would be allocated by them, and we learned about the competitive bidding process in which a vendor is identified, right? So all that, we have the context. The key document from this is the statement of work. SOW is created with the winning vendor, and that would be a document which lists down all your scope. Okay, we looked at the IT company overview also, and then we learned about account managers, delivery managers, right? And then we also looked at a typical project structure. So there would be multiple teams, on-site and offshore. On-site it would be under the purview of account managers, offshore it would be under the purview of the delivery managers, right? On-site team takes care of requirements and coordination with the customer. Offshore team takes care of design, development, and testing, right? So that the work is also clearly demarcated of who's doing what. Then we looked at the various phases of a SDLC. Primarily, we get involved in phase 1 to identify the projects. Phase 2 during the planning and then capture the detailed requirements. So a BRD would be delivered out of phase 2, right? We won't really get involved in phase 3 and 4. Phase 3 is handled by the technical architect. Phase 4 is by the development team, the programmers. Phase 5 is the testing. We could get involved in this, coordinate the testing with the customer, right? And finally, it could be implemented and maintained. This would be handled by the operations team. Okay. Then we also looked at the various types of SDLC. We looked at waterfall model, which is a simplest model. We looked at the V-shaped model, which requires systems for high reliability. We looked at prototyping model. Then we looked at the prototyping model. Wherein if there is some disambiguity, if there is some ambiguity regarding the requirements, how could you reduce that by creating the prototypes? We looked at the iterative model to reduce the timelines for the delivery of the system. We looked at the spiral models for high-risk projects. We learned about the product implementations as well. And finally, we also looked at the agile way of executing the projects. Okay, so that's primarily is what helps us understand how things work in the industry. Right now, starting tomorrow, we would actually get into the role of a business analyst. Classified the role into 6 knowledge areas. Right. So we would pick up each of those knowledge area and then understand in detail what we are going to contribute as during that part of the project, right? So starting tomorrow, I will start the requirements planning session, which will help you understand what are the first things that you do when you get into a project. The first 1 week or so, when the detailed project plan is created, what is your contribution in that process, right? So we'll learn that as part of the requirements plan. Okay.
I would like to ask a question. As far as I have understood on the Agile method and Scrum method, that Agile is easy to execute when compared to Scrum. Then why would companies use a Scrum method to process their softwares?
Okay. I think there is a little bit of disconnect there. Now, Agile is basically a group of techniques which would be used to to focus on the core productive activities. Right? So
okay.
It differs from the traditional SDLC by saying that you're wasting a lot of time in.
Yeah, I mean they are just focused on what the present problem is.
So your SDLC is what the Agile methodologists feel that we waste a lot of time in these non-productive activities like documentation and all. So that is reduced by Agile, right?
Okay.
Now, Scrum model is one of those Agile methodologies. Right? So there are different Agile methodologies also, like there is a pair programming or extreme programming, right? Then there is JAD sessions, right? All these are types of Agile methodologies. Okay.
So Scrum is a model of Agile method.
Exactly.
Yes.
Agile.
I was just confused. I thought Scrum and Agile are both opposites.
No, no, no. It's actually Agile is a bigger term. Scrum is one type of Agile. Right?
Okay.
So that is where people get confused. So actually the Scrum has become so popular that it has become synonymous with Agile now.
Yeah, I was just thinking that Scrum is a detailed way of doing and Agile is the simplest one.
Yeah, no. So some people use Agile and then they talk about Scrum, but it is not the case, right? So Scrum model is one type of Agile.
Okay.
I think that gives you the clarification. I think you'll understand it much better when we talk about the final topic. So since I didn't have enough time, I crisply gave you an overview about Scrum model here. But we'll spend some good 3-4 sessions on Scrum model and our user stories there. Okay.
Okay.